Episode 3 of Pathways Plus is brought to you by Chris Williamson, Drew and Mel Huffaker, and supporters like you. For more information, go to www.pathwaystoenglish.org. Hello, welcome to Episode 3 of Pathways Plus. Today we will be talking about the water cycle, and we're going to have a little bit of an introduction to what the water cycle is. You'll need a pencil and a piece of paper, so if you have that, go grab that and make sure you have it for today's lesson. Let's talk about what is the water cycle. So where does rain come from? We know that it comes from the sky, but how does the sky get it? Well, that's the water cycle, and that's what we're going to talk about today and learn about. Let's slide and go to our learning target for today. Our learning target, if you want to say it with me, is I am learning how water moves through the water cycle. Let's slide to our keywords. Here are our keywords for today. Take your pencil and your piece of paper and write down these keywords because we'll use them throughout the lesson, and you'll need to know what the words are to label a diagram later. So make sure you write down these words. The first word is the water cycle. Now the water cycle is very important because we need water and we need rain. We need water to drink. We need water to feed our plants, our crops, such as mangoes or corn, so we can eat those crops and plants, our fruits and vegetables. And if they don't have water, then they can't grow. So the water cycle is very, very, very important. Now, the next three words are all parts of the water cycle. So write these down so you know later what the words are so you can refer to them. So we have evaporation, and that's when the water goes up. We have condensation, and that's when the water is in the clouds. And then we have precipitation, when the water falls, and it falls in snow, with snow, or rain, depending on the temperature. So let's slide and talk about how evaporation happens. So the sun comes out, and the sun is our source of heat. The sun is what makes the water cycle go. The sun gives us energy, and that energy is used to make the water cycle go around and around. So the sun, we're going to come to the board, and if you want to draw along with me, you're welcome to. So the sun comes out, so we're going to draw a sun. Here's my pretty sun, and let's just label it sun. And the sun is the source of energy and heat. So you're going to do this, and I'm just going to write source of energy and heat. So that's what makes the water cycle go. So we have the sun that comes up. So as we do this, I'm going to teach you words to a little bit of a chant or song that you'll be able to use to help you remember how the water cycle goes. So the first part is, out comes the sun. So we have the sun that comes out. And then the sun heats up the water. So we have puddles on the ground, or we have lakes or rivers or streams. We have water everywhere. And I'm going to draw some water right here. And I'm just going to write water. So the sun heats up the water. As you can see in the video, you have a big dried up puddle. So you had all this water that was there, and there's a little bit left, but the sun will heat it up and it'll evaporate. Now, is evaporation magic? No, it's not magic. It's science. So what happens is the water's a liquid, or you can see it. You can put your hand and feel it. But as it heats up, that water turns to gas. And we'll talk more about this in another lesson. This is just an introduction to the water cycle, but just know that that water heats up and it turns into a gas. When you're cooking, something similar happens. If you're cooking and boiling a pot of water, you see that there's steam coming up and that water's turning into a gas. The same type of thing happens, and that water heats up, and I'm going to kind of draw some lines right here. So heats up water. And you can remember, you can draw this with me. Heats up the water. And once some of that water is going to evaporate. And it's going to turn into a gas. So you're going to write evaporation. And if you want to write a little description, you can. Evaporation, liquid water. So you have your liquid. Liquid means the water you can feel. You can feel it. Liquid water to gas. Or that gas is called water vapor. So I'm going to write it right here. We'll talk about it later. But just so you know, water vapor. So some of that water from, if this is a lake or a river, it goes up in that gas. It turns to gas and goes up into the air. So we had out comes the sun, warms up the water, evaporation. Okay, so what's next? Let's slide to see what's next. So we have evaporation, and then that water, as it gets higher and higher in the air, it gets colder and colder. So when this water heats up, it gets hot enough to evaporate. But then as it goes up, 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 it gets colder. And if you've ever been to the mountains or anything, you might notice that it gets a little bit colder the higher you get. So the water, same thing happens. It goes up, 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 and it gets colder and colder. And then it turns back into a liquid form, but it's really, really tiny. And if you look up in the sky, you see the clouds. So I'm going to draw a cloud. And that cloud is called condensation, or condensation happens to create that cloud. So the water is going up, 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 and it's a gas. We don't see it, but then it gets colder and turns into a liquid. So this is called condensation. And that was one of your vocab words. And just a little note, if you hear condensation, evaporation, that shun is a T-I-O-N, shun. Condensation, and we have the gas turns back into liquid. Back into liquid. So now we have our water back, but it's really small and it turns into clouds. And we have different types of clouds, and we'll talk about that later. But just know that condensation is when water goes back to being cold and forms a cloud, those clouds that you see. Okay, so now we have out comes the sun, warms up the water, evaporation, condensation. Now what happens next? Let's slide to find out. And then we have our rain, or our precipitation. And precipitation happens when the cloud gets so heavy that the water starts to fall. And sometimes that water is rain, and in warm places it's rain. But if it's really cold outside, it's not going to fall as rain. It's going to fall as, do you know? It's going to fall as snow. So it'll either fall as rain or snow or sleet or hail. There's lots of different ways, and we'll talk about that later. But just know that precipitation is when the liquid falls back to the ground. So do you see how it's a cycle? So let's draw the precipitation. We're going to draw little raindrops. And I'm going to put it right here, and I'm going to label it. Labeling means I'm going to put what it is. So I'm putting an arrow and saying this is precipitation. Precipitation. And precipitation is when the liquid water falls. And let's just say rain / snow. So now we have out comes the sun, warms up the water, evaporation, condensation, precipitation. And you drop your hands down because that shows the water falling down. So let's try it one time together. Ready? Out comes the sun, warms up the water, evaporation, condensation, precipitation. So you can watch that video and practice that so you can really get in your head how the cycle goes. So it goes on, and then the water falls back to the ground, and guess what? The sun comes back up, and it goes around, and it goes again and again and again. So it just keeps on going. That's why it's a cycle. The cycle goes again and again and again. Awesome. Let's slide to your homework. For your lab work today, you're going to draw and label a water cycle diagram. So we have our water cycle diagram here. Here's an example. You can do your own. Maybe you want to add color to it. Maybe you want to make a really pretty river for your water source. It can be any source of water. It could be a swimming pool. It could be an ocean, a lake, a river, any water source you want. You need to make sure you have a water source and then your evaporation, label it. Remember what labeling means. You want to see how evaporation, this is evaporation, showing the water. So it's labeling what it is. You don't want to just draw it. You want to make sure you have the words that go along with it. So you have evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. And you're going to make a diagram just like I did of the water cycle diagram. Make sure you include the words evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. After you do this lab work, send it in to us. We want to see all your diagrams, and maybe you'll have a chance for your diagram to be on the show. So just send it on over, and we'd love to show some of the water cycle diagrams that are created. Let's slide to our learning target. So our learning target today was, if you want to say it with me, please do. I am learning how water moves through the water cycle. Did we learn that today? Did we learn how it goes? The sun comes out, it warms up the water goes up with evaporation, turns into gas, creates condensation, the clouds, and then precipitation. That's our water cycle. So that's what we learned today. This was an introduction to the water cycle. So in our next few lessons about the water cycle, we'll go more into detail about what evaporation is, how it happens, some examples, and all the different aspects we'll talk about and go through. Great job today. If you feel like you totally understand the water cycle, put a 3 on your finger. If you feel like you sort of understand the water cycle, put a 2 on your finger. And if you are so confused, put a 1 on your finger. And that's okay if you're very confused. Talk with people around you. One very good thing you can do is teach each other what you know. Even if they already know about the water cycle, it's good to practice teaching what you know, because then maybe there's a part you think, oh, I forgot what happens when it goes up, what happens after that. And then maybe they can help you know what the next step is. So teach each other what the water cycle is, and that will help your English language too to be able to explain it. And maybe there are words that you come to that you don't know the English word for, and you can use other people around you to help you come up with those words. Great job today. I'm so proud of you guys. I'm excited to see you next time on Pathways Plus.